Hi, this is session 2 of your English lesson for this week. So first of all, we'll begin with a recap of what we did yesterday. So I want you to have a little think, and you can write some notes if you'd like. What types of figurative language might you see in a poem? And why might an author choose to use figurative language? So if you pause the video now, and then you can have a go at writing answers to those questions. Okay, so what types of figurative language might you see in a poem? And as we discussed yesterday, that could be metaphor, simile, or personification. And why might an author choose to use figurative language? And as we discussed, one of the aims of a poem is to create that image in the reader's mind. And all of these types of things, like a metaphor, helps to paint that real clear picture. So today's lesson, we are learning to identify the structure of a poem. So yesterday we looked at the vocabulary, the actual words used, and today is the structure. So if you remember, the structure of a piece of text is basically how it's built and set out. So that's what we're looking at today. So I want you to have a think about, in your first activity, is how is the poem Silver structured? So when you're thinking about the structure of a poem, remember the words linked to poetry structure are rhyme pattern, syllables, and stanzas. So just to recap, obviously we know that poems don't always have to rhyme, but authors of poems often choose to do that. The rhyming words will always be at the end of the line. So have a look at how often they use rhyming words and what the pattern looks like. Now syllables, remember that is the beat of a word. So for example, the word silver has 2 syllables, because you'd say silver, silver, so that's 2 syllables. So in a poem, think about how many syllables are on each line. And stanzas, now when we talk about stanzas, remember we talk about verses. It's the same as a verse. So if you think back to when we did World War I poetry, some of those poems were presented with verses that repeated or verses that had 4 lines, or sometimes poems are just continued. It's like one big verse or stanza. Now to do this first activity, you can either use the sheet you wrote on yesterday, which I'll just show you to remind yourself. So you made notes on this sheet yesterday. You can add your notes about the structure onto this sheet, or also included in the downloads on our class page, you can use this version of the poem that I'll be using as well, and you can always write about structure on there. So your first activity is to answer by making notes on your sheet, how is the poem Silver structured? Thinking about rhyme patterns, syllables, and stanzas. So if you pause the video now and have a little go. Okay, so hopefully you've done that. So I'm going to show you my version of the poem so you can see. So first of all, we're going to think about rhyme pattern. So first of all, we look for the rhyming words. So we've got moon and shoon, which rhyme, seas and trees, catch and thatch. So remember, rhyming words means the sound at the end of the word has to rhyme, even though it may be spelt differently. Now here you can see, this is the rhyming pattern here is rhyming couplets. Now remember, couple means 2, and the 2 lines are next to each other that rhyme. So moon and shoon, and then it changes to seas and trees, catch and thatch. So this poem is written in rhyming couplets, and the pattern we would say is AA, because the first 2 words rhyme. The first words at the end of the first 2 lines rhyme, and then BB because seas and trees rhyme. So that is the rhyming structure of this poem. Now, if you think about the stanza, here the way this is set out, there are no verses. This is a 14-line poem, and it's been written as one continuous piece rather than verses or have any repetition, as we may have seen in other poems previously. Now, if we think about syllables, these can be a little bit tricky to count. So if you've tried it yourself, you'll have seen that every line in this poem has 8 syllables. So I'm going to show you now how you would have counted it, because sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Okay, so we've got slowly, silently, now the moon. So there's 8. And the second line, walks the knight in her silver shoon. 8 again. So remember, some words are single syllable words like in, because if you were clapping in, you just say in. But for example, silently is silently, silently. Now, if you continue to count every line, you will see that there are 8 syllables on every line. And poets use that because a lot of poems are read out loud and they sound better and they flow a little bit more. And as we talked about previously, they are a little bit more, sometimes poems like a song, the way they have that nice sound to them. So if we go back to here, so that is how the silver is structured. Now we're going to move on today. Our next activity is for you to have a little go at writing another rhyming couplet for this poem, Silver. You can write a few rhyming couplets if you'd like to, but definitely have a go at just one. Now, obviously, when we do any type of writing, we always plan first, because it's much easier to get your notes and your thoughts in order and then think about the quality of your sentences. So when we are planning for a poem, obviously this piece, we know it's silver and it's about the moonlight. We are just adding an extra verse, but we still need to plan what we would say in each part. So for a poem, because the structure we are going to follow the same as silver as we are adding an extra couplet to this poem, we know that each line has to have 8 syllables to make sure it's in keeping with the pattern, and it's rhyming couplets. So your 2 lines you will write will have a rhyming word at the end of each. Now the easiest way to do this is you choose your rhyming words first. It's much easier to do that than think of one line and then have to try and find something that rhymes. So I've got some suggestions here. You don't have to use these for your rhyming couplets, but they're a start if you're struggling a little bit. So we've got door and floor, light and bright, near and here, shine and line. Now you can see that obviously they've been chosen because they are in keeping with the theme of the poem, to do with moonlight and things being silvery and light and things shining. Because remember, you're keeping it in the line with the poem that's already been written. So we've got door and floor is what I'm going to go with first. So if we go back to the original poem, obviously this is just to give yourself some ideas as well. It's talking about things that the moon is casting its light upon and how they now appear silver. So here we've got things about the trees. Now, when you clarified words yesterday, casements is windows, or like the frame of the window. We've got, obviously there's some animals that it talks about as well, and it's got a river. So you try and choose a subject that was slightly different to that the moonlight is shining upon. So I'm going to go with door and floor. So I would write them at the end, and then I need to think of 2 lines which have 8 syllables that obviously fit in with those couplets. So I have chosen silver light on every door, shadows stretching across the floor. So mine both have 8 syllables, so we can just check. Silver light on every door and shadows stretching across the floor. So they've got 8 in, and they've got obviously the rhyming words at the end. Now remember, when you come to write things in poetry or any writing, you do have to edit as you go along. There'll be lots of times you've got to try different words in, and when you say it out loud and count the syllables, you might realise you've got an extra word in that you need to take out, or you might need to add something in. So for example, if I'd written this, I needed an extra word, you can always add an adjective. So I could have added onto the first line, if I needed another syllable, silver light on every single door. So think about how you're going to add extra words in if needed. So you will have to do a little bit of playing around. Remember, your first one might not be perfect, so do just keep having a go. So you can write this. You'll notice in the download section on the class website, there is some plain paper, it says to write it, lined paper to write your verse on. So you can write it on that, and remember about editing and having a little go and see what you come up with. So I hope you enjoy that, and I'll see you in the next session.